Welcome to another episode of The Breakdown. With the provincial election only a few months away, hopefully, we'll see what happens. We are sitting down with a guest we've had on the show for a few times, and we got a bunch of topics we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about the education curriculum, we're going to talk about maybe some performance art, and we're going to talk about, as he waits for the collective gasp from progressive Twitter, we're talking about the NDP, we're talking about the nomination process. We got some things. And I got to say, before we get into it, and before I introduce our guest proper, mad props to the podcast Women of AB Poly. They were the first one to have this conversation with our guest. They did an unbelievably good job. We're trying to present this conversation as like almost supplemental to what they did, because they did such a good job. So if you're listening to this, make sure that you check out the episode of Women of AB Poly with the amazing woman who's joining us today, Dr. Angela Grace. Dr. Grace, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me back, Nate.
It's been a little while. How you been?
It's been a while. Well, it's been a roller coaster. Absolutely. I don't remember. I think I was on probably right before the big rally that we had about education and the curriculum on April 2nd. And then honestly, since then, pretty much gone into the depths of despair about this curriculum and education. When Adriana LaGrange announced in May that this curriculum is law and just get used to it, something in me broke. And if this is the trajectory for education and the curriculum, we are in serious trouble. I feel like I'm in that movie. Feel like I'm the expert scientist in that movie, Don't Look Up, saying the sky is falling, and people are like, "Oh no, we're good. Teachers have got this. We're good. Oh, we've got class sizes of 35 plus. Yeah, teachers have got this." No, teachers don't have this.
Yeah.
Teachers do not have this.
Yeah. So for anybody who maybe, I don't want to blow our own horn, but just a couple of weeks ago, we were the #1 political podcast in Yemen. So we've got this little bit of a growing audience going on. For people who maybe didn't get our episodes that we've done with you before, which they should go back and listen to with any free time that they have after they've listened to the AB Poly episode. Who is Dr. Angela Grace, and why are you talking about the curriculum?
Okay, well, I was a grade 1 teacher. And so I'll just give a little brief story. So I was a grade 1 teacher, and one year, a group of my grade 1s, there was something off with the little girls, and I caught one of them throwing out her lunch. I'm like, "Honey, what are you doing?" And she said, "We started a diet club to be like her moms." And they were throwing out their lunches, running laps around the playground to try to lose weight. And I was like, I just knew how harmful this was, because I'd had an eating disorder when I was in junior high school, college, and I wanted to help prevent it. So I went back to school and got my master's in counseling to be a school counselor. Things progressed and I became a psychologist, worked in private practice, but I still wasn't preventing the problem of eating disorders for kids. So I went back and worked on my PhD, and my focus was comprehensive school health. So comprehensive school health is a foundation of health in education, and it talks about all the components of health. So physical health, emotional, mental, social, relational, spiritual, and environmental health as well. So it's a whole package. And so I was invited as a professional to review the 2017 draft curriculum after the PC government started it in 2008. It was continued by the NDP, and we followed a very, very logical, professional, collaborative, nonpartisan curriculum development process. So I got to review the draft in 2017, gave a whole ton of recommendations for it. I got to review it again in 2018, and it was really good. It was really solid. Teachers were excited about it. It was great. And then along comes Jason Kenney, elected premier in 2019. threatens to shred the draft and take the word public out of education, out of the school boards. And I got really, really, really worried. So I met with my MLA, Jason Copping, in October 2019 and asked why was the curriculum development team disbanded? And his response was, well, a bunch of people retired. And I'm like, I'm still here. I still want to do this. This is like, why didn't, I didn't get a PhD to not use it. So I gave him my CV and he said he put my name forward as, as a subject matter expert. And he never did. And then I started to see the nightmare coming down the pipe. And when Adriana LaGrange released the draft on March 30th, 2021, something inside me snapped. And I was like, I did not go through all this education to sit back and watch a nightmare curriculum be dropped on our kids' heads. And there were just so many things wrong with it that I couldn't believe it. And then so I did my due diligence and my politically correct review to the Premier and the Minister of Education and my MLA, and I also sent it to the ATA. And then Dr. Carla Peck got a hold of me and said, I've read your review. Would you be interested in working with us as one of the steering committee members for the Alberta Curriculum Analysis website? And unbeknownst to me, every single area in the curriculum was being reviewed and people were independently submitting their reviews. And so we put it all together on this one website. Bridget Sterling did an amazing job compiling them all, and it was just review after review after review. So when I knew my area of comprehensive school health, so PE and wellness, was terrible, then I saw English. I saw like the language arts. I saw the nightmare of social studies. I saw issues with math and issues with science. And then I was like, music and art, everything was being ripped apart. And so, some parents and raging grannies approached me in August 2021 about doing a provincial rally. So we did that at the legislature. There were a few hundred people showed up. Then there was another one in December, and things just ramped up. Like, it was a terrible curriculum. Then there was Adriana LaGrange accusing teachers of bullying her because they didn't like the curriculum. Well, they're not bullying, they're stating how serious this is. And then it just got worse and worse and worse. And I'm, at the rally in April, it was literally a provincial wide rally. There were people, Carla Peck led one in Edmonton, and there was one in Lethbridge, Red Deer, Grand Prairie, Medicine Hat, Calgary. People are really, really worried. And I've kind of it just kind of took on a life of its own. And I'm kind of one of the main experts opposing this curriculum. And we can't let up until it is repaired, until there is a solid, nonpartisan, quality, evidence-based curriculum that is going to serve the next 30 to 40 years. And honestly, I just want to work with the people who are willing to listen and take this incredibly seriously.
Now, obviously, one of the reasons why we have you here. Actually, before we get into that, I wanna let's talk about the Western Standard for a sec, shall we? Because it gets relevant really quick, and I don't want to throw the baby away with the bathwater and all that. But the context here is really, really important. During COVID,
yes,
you appeared on the Western Standard.
I appeared on a lot of media outlets in the last few years.
You're stealing my intro from me here. But yeah, you're absolutely right. You have appeared on a lot of media outlets. One of them was the Western Standard. And I want to hear from you, because there's some people who say, oh, if you appear on XYZ, whatever the show or the platform or the thing is. I think there's a big difference between going on a program or going on a media thing to say, hey, here's some facts, here's some reality, and there's a big difference between that and saying, and I bought the T-shirt.
Yeah.
So let's talk about your Western Standard appearance. What was it? Why did you do it? How did it go?
Well, there were two of them actually. So
Okay.
the first one was with Melanie, a reporter with the Western Standard, and she had put out, it wasn't a tweet, it must have been on Facebook or something, because I wasn't on Twitter then. She put out something asking people to talk about their vaccine experiences. And as a psychologist, and I've heard a ton of people's vaccine experiences, including my own. So I thought, yeah, I'll talk to her. I'll talk to her about it. So I messaged her, and she said, Angela, would you be willing to come on and do an interview talking about mandates and lockdowns and the impact on people's mental health? So I said, yes, of course, because it did. Like the whole pandemic, it took our world and it turned it upside down. And so there's a whole bunch of areas to consider. You know, some people who are really introverted did really well with not having to go out in public as much. You know, other people really struggled with that. My own mental health took a hit because I never got any time off during the pandemic. Like I just worked. Everything for me shifted to staring at this tiny little computer camera, right? And all of my work as a psychologist is very still. It's very private. It's very one-on-one. So my recreation is out doing dance and yoga and pottery and performance art. So my mental health took a hit because all of my recreation and socializing was taken away. And that was a lot of people's experience. So in my mind, and in speaking with Melanie after, is it was a very balanced interview that spoke about the necessities and the challenges and a whole bunch of people's perceptions and experiences. And that's my job as a psychologist, is to set my own biases aside and deeply listen to what people are experiencing. And then dig into the well of evidence-based best practices to try to help people navigate these issues. So one of the things I brought up, I think the interview was during the winter. Yeah, I think so. Anyway, one of the things I made a comparison to was seasonal affective disorder, where we don't have enough sunlight. We're hibernating more. And so it was giving evidence-based best practices to help people navigate the challenges of mandates and lockdowns. And I had people reach out after that saying, thank you. Like that was really helpful. So in my mind, it was just pretty much exactly what I did on CTV for the last few years about seasonal affective disorder and how people can help navigate those times when life shuts down a bit more.
And I think it's important to highlight at this point, because it seems like a lot of the conversation in regards to the health measures that were taken versus, which it shouldn't be, the mental health impact of the dumpster fire that we all we lived through for the last 3 years, are the approach to it seems to be mutually exclusive. Like, we can only talk about the mental health impacts of the health restrictions, or we can only talk about the health restrictions and the fact that if we hadn't had them, we would have saved lives. We can't talk about both at the same time. But the reality is, both can absolutely be true. So we can acknowledge, it's entirely possible to acknowledge, hey, you know what? We had this global train wreck that visited upon literally almost everybody in the planet, things that most people have never ever experienced in an extremely traumatic way. if we hadn't had the health protections in place, way more people would have died. But at the same time, this very bad thing did happen to everyone, and it did have an impact on people's mental health. Like, those two things are not mutually exclusive.
They're not mutually exclusive, and same with the vaccines. Yes, I was nervous about the vaccines when they first came out because I'm a researcher and a scientist, and I know how long clinical studies take. Am I an anti-vaxxer? Absolutely not. Do I respect people who choose not to do it? Absolutely. It's like everyone had to make their best health decisions. But just because I can see both sides or multiple sides of an issue, like nothing is black and white here. We need to be able to examine all the sides of it. And the second interview that I did with the Western Standard was with Corey Morgan. And it was about creating the need for a nonpartisan curriculum. And so it was interesting because I'm clearly not UCP. That's fine. But I'm also a middle of the road person who is just very logical. And so it was interesting having that interview with Corey Morgan, and he actually said the statement, and I'm going to paraphrase it. Angela, if you and I sat down over a beer and talked politics, we're probably on very different ends of the spectrum, but we can still come together and agree that this curriculum needs to be nonpartisan, evidence-based, because it's going to impact our children. And that's it. And so that's an example of two people on very different sides of political spectrum who agree that this needs to be nonpartisan. So I also don't, in the past, have not paid a whole ton of attention to the news and which outlets are right and which outlets are left. Like, I'm just not interested. I'm interested in doing my job.
Well, and I think a piece of it that's important to acknowledge as well is, and I bitched about this last week. For anybody who's listening to this, we're recording it on August 29th. But about a week and a half ago, I bitched about the fact that there are news outlets, particularly with the UCP leadership race, that are wildly biased, and they write stories that
and
are
columnists as well.
Yeah, for sure. That are inflammatory, they're inaccurate, they're misleading, but they're also the outlets that certain candidates are almost exclusively talking to.
Yes.
And so the reality is if you want to find out what Danielle Smith's comment was on the very bad thing that happened, you're going to have to listen to or read a little bit of True North. And it hurts. I don't like doing it, but that's where that information is coming from. And to exclude any source completely is it's going to leave holes in your perception. But I would also argue that it limits your ability to understand where other people are coming from.
It also limits your ability to use your critical thinking. We need multiple points in order to critically think and examine issues. Absolutely. Something happened on like with the attacks on female reporters and politicians. I can't remember her name, but someone had posted on Twitter, why aren't white women standing up for the women of color who this has happened to for years? And to me, that was a smack in the face, because she was right. I did not speak up. And the reason why is because I, as a white woman, did not want to say the wrong thing and have anything, inflammatory. However, she was right. And we do need to speak up. And so I apologized for that. And I was like, yeah, you're right. I will do better. And so that's it too, is we need to be able to be called out on things and meet them with respect and a changed perspective. Yeah. So do I know the right words to say about women of color being attacked? I don't know the right words, but I can say I will stand with you, and I will help figure this out. And I'm going to get some reading in that's going to help me do better.
And I think that there's also, said the middle-aged white man with a beard, Lord knows I'm going to hear about that after this episode. Um, I think that there's also to be something to be said for, like, I can't claim to, looking at the recent, I don't even have the right word for it. I'll go with assault against the deputy prime minister. I'm not going to try to claim to understand what she was feeling or what her experiences are. I don't need to. I really don't need to. All I need to say is that guy's an asshole. That's it.
Exactly. That's not okay.
Yeah. And I don't think that I want to get back to the Western Standards thing, but I think this is important too. I don't think there's so much, and I think you verbalized it incredibly well. There's a lot of people who are very afraid of saying the wrong thing, but when somebody's behaving that way, I don't need to try and identify with the victim.
No.
I just need to say, hey, this thing that this person's doing, that's not cool.
Mm-hmm.
And if you can't agree with that statement, like if you can't agree that that guy's a raging asshole,
Yeah.
I probably don't want to hang out with you anyways.
Props to Diane Tarian who said it. F off, you F-wads. Like,
yep.
Nothing more needs to be said. And
yep.
We don't need to say, oh, we like this person because of this, and you shouldn't treat them that way. No, just stop.
Yep.
End of story.
Now, back to the Western Standard, though. To my knowledge, please correct me if I'm wrong, at no point during either of those interviews did you say, oh, the Western Standard's the best. They're the only news outlet that anybody should be listening to. They're the best of all of them.
I don't recall those words coming out of my mouth.
So I think it's really important to differentiate the fact that somebody can appear on a outlet without endorsing it.
Yes. Yes,
I also
a
think
person can be a neutral, logical person in whatever outlet. But there's interviews with CTV that I've needed to hijack because the interviewer is asking stupid questions and clearly didn't read what I submitted that I wanted to talk about. So I've become a pro at staying in my lane with what I know, no matter what is coming my way. Because if you're wrong, I'm not going to engage in that. I'm just going to steer it back to what is logical, evidence-based practice. That's it.
And I just really wanted to highlight that because I know that there's some people who look at any sort of appearance on any sort of thing as an endorsement.
It's not an endorsement.
Yeah, exactly. It's a conversation. And you can have a conversation with people that you disagree with without it being a whole thing.
Yes.
Or people that you agree with on some things.
Exactly.
So now that that's out of the way, you did a boatload of activism and advocacy for the curriculum.
I did.
And then you kind of decided to try to up it a little bit. Let's talk about that.
Well, it wasn't really that I decided to up it. It was, I got to the end of the road. Like literally when Adriana LaGrange said the curriculum is law, get used to it, something inside me broke. And I was like, there is literally nowhere else I can go with my advocacy work for this. I've said everything that can be said. Now all I'm doing is just repeating the same thing, even though there are a whole bunch of people who clearly haven't heard it. So that's fine. And I'll, keep referring people back. Thank God, Nate, I did those YouTube videos where I explain everything. So I can just say, go watch this video. And I don't have to spew it out again. But yeah, so what happened was, so first of all, last summer, I met Sarah Hoffman at a Stampede event, and she said she followed my work on curriculum and we'd had discussions about curriculum. So when I learned that if I send something to my MLA, to also send it to the opposition, so that everybody has it. So that's what I do. Letter to my MLA and the opposition. So Sarah and I talked about education. And so what happened was she said, have you considered running as an MLA? And I'm like, no, that's not my thing. I need to be nonpartisan about this curriculum. And she's like, yeah, fair enough. Well, then what happened was things ramped up with education and curriculum over the year. Adriana LaGrange, brick wall in front of my face, slammed the door in front of my face and everybody's faces. And I just thought there's nowhere else for me to go. And then my husband and I went to a healthcare rally, because of course I support, my friends in healthcare too. And one of the new NDP candidates came up to me and said, Angela, when are you running? And my response was, who are you? And why are you asking me that? And so he said, no, I follow your work on education. I really think you should put your name in. And my husband and I drove home and we talked about it. And I said, do it. Like, is that what I need to do? Like, I really feel like that's the only way I'm going to get in and help honestly change this and be a voice of logic and reason. And he's like, absolutely, do it. What have you got to lose? So I did. That afternoon, I went home. I emailed Garrett at the NDP. He sent me an application package. I filled everything in and off it went. And then I was like, okay, well, now what do I do? So then I was in this position of, you can't say anything because you can't go public until you're vetted. So I was chatting with a few people and, figuring out this whole campaigning thing. And then I was invited to the NDP council. So I went in June, and that was a really fascinating experience for me. It was really interesting. And then I had my interview with the NDP in July. And, to be honest, it wasn't even really an interview. They just said, why do you want to run for the NDP? And so I said, why? And then they said, we're just going to get right into your social media. And I was like, what's wrong with my social media? Like, and it was kind of surprising to me. I mean, literally, so the only thing I'd already done was I'd removed all my effing bird tweets, which I'd done to Adriana LaGrange and Jason Kenney. Like, anything they posted, I just responded with an effing bird. So I'd removed all those. I'd removed all the profanity, right?
I got to jump in for context there because, and this is, I think, important. There might be some folks who don't know what effing birds are. And so if you don't know what effing birds are, they're basically, correct me if I'm wrong, Dr. Grace, they're basically just like old wood style carvings of birds saying things often with a little bit of spicy.
Yeah. Like, my favorite one was about the curriculum. This is going to end in a giant effing disaster.
There we go.
To me, that's appropriate.
Yeah,
that's just an appropriate response. So,
and accurate.
Yeah, and accurate. So I removed things that I thought were, maybe a little bit like they had their day, right? Whatever, it's done. But none of it was bad. It was just a little bit of spiciness and a little bit of profanity. So whatever. So I did that. And then they said, we're concerned about these pictures. And I'm like, what pictures? And they brought up dance pictures, and they said, this is cultural appropriation. And I looked at the dance pictures and I'm like, that was on stage at the Bella Theatre at Mount Royal for a world dance performance with over 100 other performers about appreciating world dance and different cultures. Another one was at the Jubilee Auditorium. Another one was at Global Fest. And I was like, I'm a professional dancer. Like, I'm a professional dancer, and I dance main stage dances, performances with a variety of different groups. So I've been like, and the one picture that they were very concerned about was I had feathers in my hair and a stripe on my face. And they said, that's cultural appropriation. And I'm like, I was a bird and a wolf. Like, the whole performance was based on the Jungle Book. We were wolves at the beginning, and then we ended up flocking in these formations, like how birds flock. And it was absolutely beautiful. It was a beautiful celebration of cultural art. That's it.
And birds.
And birds. Yeah, exactly. I've also, so here's a really funny one. I was, what were we? What's the name of it? We were post-apocalyptic warriors at a festival in September 2019. So before COVID happened. So it was my last main stage performance. And we were these post-apocalyptic warriors with like wild hair and prints on our face and, just these amazing costumes. And I'm like, I felt so badass in that. And there were thousands of people celebrating. Like, it was just so much fun. And I'm all, how can you get, how dare you, equivalent performance art with cultural appropriation?
Well, I gotta ask, and I'm gonna try not to jump in too much, but I'm probably going to because that's just what I do. But like when they said that the bird costume was cultural appropriation, did they say which culture? Because
They just said Indigenous. They said I was in Indigenous costume. I was not in Indigenous costume. I was in an interpretation of a bird and a wolf, and it was designed by a Métis artist.
but like where I'm kind of bumping is there's lots of cultures all around the world that have bird costumes.
That's a really
So
good point.
if you're going to say cultural appropriation, I feel like you should be able to identify which culture you feel is being appropriated.
That's a
Because
good
if it's
point.
just a bird costume, then it's, I mean, as he said to the psychologist, sometimes a bird's costume is just a bird costume.
Bird costume. And can we also just add in, it was two middle-aged white men telling me this?
That may be relevant.
Like it, and it is true. Like I'll say, when I posted a selfie in my costume and the performance on my Facebook, one of my Indigenous friends, beautiful human being, messaged me individually and said, Angela, what are you doing? You look like a white girl in dressing Indian. And I said, Cheryl, that's fair. Let's talk about this. So when I explained the dance, when I explained the context, she's like, okay, you're fine. You were in costume, not regalia. You were doing performance art, not ceremony. And you were with a group of women. So in context, and this is what our discussion was. In context, yes, it's good. Like, you were doing performance art. Out of context, it looks bad. And so now I understand everything that I do needs to be placed in the right context, right? So not drunk at a Halloween party, dressed Indian, no. In a main stage performance, Métis artist, one world cultural dance celebration, yes.
Yeah.
And that's what we have to notice the differences. And we also have to be aware of not throwing out terms like cultural appropriation without fully understanding the context.
Yeah.
Right? Like, I've even learned for the art, like I've got art in my office. I've learned from my Indigenous friends and elders that you buy original art directly from the artist. You don't buy knockoffs at the dollar store or Walmart. Okay, great. So original art from the artists. Same with beadwork. When I get beaded earrings, it is directly from an Indigenous artist. It is not off the rack at our dams.
Yeah. And I think it's important to highlight as well that you were working with a Métis artist. And so there's an important...
She painted the stripe on my face.
Right. So there's a difference between working with artists of any culture with their consent and even acting as a medium for their art, and saying this is my thing, and it's really quite we talked about this a little bit in the pre-interview, but if we're going to get to a place where any sort of affiliation with any sort of cultural symbol is a very, very bad thing that should be avoided at all costs, regardless of the context, then there might need to be a conversation about the leader of the NDP appearing in a headdress.
Right.
If we take the context out of it, Rachel Notley was running around in a headdress. With the appropriate context, it was given to her by the members of the Blackfoot Nation.
Right.
Those are two totally different beasts. But to just ignore the context is
yes,
reckless.
and that's the issue, is ignoring the context. And we also have to look at context over generations. Like what we did in the 80s is not, in terms of dressing up in costumes, not appropriate. And when you know better, don't do it.
Yeah.
Right? Like I was dressing up for Halloween a few years ago and I put on one of my dance costumes and I'm like, it's easy. I'll just go as a gypsy. And my husband's like, no, like that's a culture. And I'm like, oh my God, I didn't even register. Costume change. I don't remember what I went as, but whatever. Probably just belly dancer. But like it's about learning. It's about when you're called out on something, like when my friend Cheryl contacted me about my costume. It's about having those conversations, and it's about making intentional choices for the future. So yes, I do some edgy art. I've also been a prostitute. I like in a play, because I do theater. I've also talked about my vagina and the vagina monologues. Like I do feminist, multicultural art that pushes edges, because those are the conversations we need to talk about. These are the conversations we need to have.
And there's nothing wrong with those conversations. I want to be really, really clear about that, because
they're necessary.
Absolutely. So they didn't like that you were, in effect, a medium for a Métis artist. What else did they have issue with?
Well, they didn't like that I did the Western Standard interview, because they said it would, they said it went against their position on mandates and lockdowns.
So I'm gonna jump in again real quick there, because one of the biggest complaints with the UCP government that we have heard from media, as well as from at times the NDP and members of their caucus, is that Jason Kenney has blacklisted certain media outlets and has gone after certain media outlets. And if I'm understanding what you're saying correctly, the NDP has their own blacklist.
Well, I can't say if it's specifically a blacklist, but certainly their perspective of the Western Standard is not high on their list. If I couldn't even do a neutral best practice interview there.
And not in any context affiliated with the NDP as well.
No.
So you were just going on talking as a psychologist about mental health stuff. You weren't in any way being like, oh, and also I like orange.
No, not at all. Literally, the thought of doing anything political and applying for anything did not occur until the middle of May, when I was literally at the end of what I thought I could advocate for. Okay. Like that's it.
So they didn't like the Western Standard interview. They didn't like that you worked with a Métis artist.
Well, they didn't like. Yeah, they didn't like that I was dancing.
I'm going to say
it. Which is so bizarre.
Because here's what really bothers me about this. With them being willing to overlook the context, with them being willing to overlook the fact that you were acting as a medium for the Métis artist, guess what they've just done? They have misrepresented and erased her work. I don't know who it was, but just in this conversation, that's the takeaway that I take out of that.
Oh my goodness, I didn't even think of that.
Yeah, it's
and well, and if we think about that, then it's also erasing the work of Spark Productions, which put on the One World Dance performance, which is one of the most beautiful performances I've ever seen. And actually, it's going to happen again next year in May or June. Clearly, I'll be dancing in it. And so will a whole bunch of other people. And If it's the one dance performance you go see in Alberta, go see that one. It's truly a celebration with some of the most amazing dancers and artists I've ever seen. It's really,
Okay.
it's really great. So yeah, well, and then it also put me in a position of thinking about the other performers there. Are white women not supposed to do Bollywood dancing because we're white? We're not from that culture. Are and like it just makes it very messy when we as artists are trying to work together and collaborate and raise up society by getting along and saying, hey, this isn't, that no one owns this, we own it together. Or is it putting people back, like only these women can do African dance, only these women can do Bollywood, only these women can do this, only these women can do this. Oh wait, we can't have men do this. Like, where does it leave artists? Where does it leave performance art?
Well, and I guess the other question is like, if we're going to use this logic, which I think is toxic, by the way,
Yes.
of you have to be of that culture to do that culture's thing when you've been invited to do so, then if if a a white woman dances Bollywood, for example, and she's been invited to dance Bollywood by the Bollywood an East
Community.
Indian, yeah. Um, if that is somehow inappropriate, is it okay for a white woman to go watch the performance, or is she appropriating by proximity? Like, it just gets so ridiculous so quick, and I think it really comes down to context and intent.
Yes. Yes. It comes down to the intent. And unfortunately, we do live in a world where people look at a single picture and assume the intent without discussing the actual context and intent of it. And, it's made, I have the same thing in myself. I've looked at pictures and been like, oh my gosh, that's horrible. And yet, if I look at the second part, it's like, well, maybe there's more to this story. So that's what I'm training my brain to go to, is maybe there's more to this story. Now, sometimes there's not. Sometimes there's not. Sometimes it actually really is horrible. But it's about understanding the context. And honestly, people need to get off their high horse.
Now, before we get to the next part, because I have a little bit of context that I want to add before we get too far into the next part. Did they have any other concerns that you want to share with us today?
So the one last one that they put in the email to me was they were concerned about my work as a national psychedelic advocate because, and what they said was the public perception on psychedelic medicine is divisive, and we're going with public opinion. So going with public opinion instead of evidence-based science. And my work with psychedelics is on the evidence-based, best practice, ethical science side. And I know I was on this side previously. I was on I'm a good little Catholic girl who never does drugs, and psychedelics must be terrible. Now, as an ethical evidence-based psychologist, it is my job to look at best practice treatments and enhance the profession moving forward. So, let's look. There's a difference between, again, context, right? There's a difference between handing out psychedelics at a rave or people going on recreational psychedelic trips to Peru or Costa Rica and being injured and traumatized overseas, or people being like, hey, I did them once, I can facilitate for other people. Like, those are dangerous, right? If you look at the actual evidence-based treatment side, it is ethical, there is a process, it is very, very intentional. And honoring these sacred medicines that have been used for centuries and bringing them back into the light as these are medicines that can be very beneficial. That being said, they're not for everybody.
I think it's also, it would, again, in the interest of context, if we took a look at some of the issues in Alberta that are divisive, let's just run down a few for fun here. Let's talk about renewable energy. That's pretty divisive in Alberta.
Yeah.
Let's talk about trans people reading or drag people reading stories in libraries. That's pretty divisive. Let's talk about GSAs. Let's talk about same-sex marriage. All of these issues are deeply divisive in the mask mandates or health measures. All of these things are deeply divisive. They're things that are the NDP's bread and butter. They're things that they're entirely comfortable taking positions on, but somehow evidence-based medicine was a bridge too far?
I literally can't answer that question. Like, I don't understand, especially when you have, a medical professional. Like, I'm a trained mental health professional, PhD psychologist, who's done intensive training. And I haven't been involved in any research studies, but I read the research studies, who's a national advocate and about to become a trainer for other facilitators. And also taking a strong stand against psychedelics are not business. Like, we don't want this in a business model. We need this in a medical model. And saying, don't just go, like, it needs to be done well. And that's what I'm advocating for. So
Okay.
yes, it blows my mind. It literally blows my mind that this happened.
Maybe it's the psychedelics.
That's a whole other story.
Probably.
But that's just it. Like, yes, as as a psychedelic therapist, I need to know the medicine. So yes, I have, in part of my training, done psychedelics. And it is, for many people, a profound mode of healing. My life was completely changed. I am a way more confident, self-assured person from clearing some of the trauma in a very intentional therapeutic setting. Does it mean, I'm dealing them out of my basement and sharing them everywhere? No, that's the dangerous side. This is the safe, ethical side. And it's part of any practicum in new therapies, is you need to know what you're doing. I would be super skeptical if anybody went to a psychologist who said they do psychedelic medicine, who have not actually utilized them.
Yeah,
I don't want to take
got their trauma that they need to clear.
I don't want to take swimming lessons from someone who's never been in the pool.
Yeah. So I'm gonna tee it up a little bit on the heavy side here, but they raise these concerns about your work in evidence-based psychedelic medicine. They raise these concerns about you supporting a Métis artist. They raise these concerns about you appearing on the Western Standard and speaking from your sandbox. Now, I would love to say that it's unrelated, but it's not. Before we get to the next part of the conversation, I think it's really, really important to highlight that as per the NDP Constitution, the only requirement that you have to have in order to be a nomination candidate is to be a member in good standing. That's it. There's no mechanism in the NDP Constitution for a candidate to be rejected, presumably because at one point they had enough faith in their membership to make good decisions about who they were putting up. But there's no legal mechanism in the NDP Constitution for which they can reject a candidate. Now, we've done a bunch of other episodes where we've talked to people who had that experience. I already know the answer, but Dr. Grace, what happened next?
Well, it's declined. I mean, it was a decline email. They said I had 5 days to appeal it, but why would I appeal when it was crystal clear that they're not going to support my work as an artist or as an evidence-based practitioner? Like, why would I And why would I want to be censored where I share best practice information in the media? So I just said, I'm not appealing this. I did send a rebuttal letter saying these are out of context and it's a poor choice. But I also want to clarify, this is not about NDP bashing at all. This is not about, oh, poor me, I didn't get to campaign. I'm fine, because my work really is about the nonpartisan curriculum. I only went that direction because I thought I had to. And I found out I don't have to. And that's okay. And so yeah, I was declined. And then I tell you, when you're declined, you are ghosted. There are no further discussions. There is nothing. But really, and again, I'm fine. Like that's to be expected. They've got other people to deal with. But what concerns me is, if it happened to me, how many other good, strong, logical, forward-thinking Albertans have aspirations of making policy changes to help Albertans? How many of us are being declined? And that's what concerns me. How many other doctors, teachers, people with PhD expertise in their area? Like, honestly, I know that I am not strong in other areas. Like, don't ask me about renewable energy, other than I think solar energy is awesome and Teslas are really cool. Like, other than that, I don't know how to make policies about this. But I do know education, and that's all I wanted to do. And think about the brilliance we could have with experts in their area doing their job as public servants. So I still see my job as a public servant. I still see my job as evidence-based practices for education and for mental health. And I will continue to do that. Honestly, it's actually better for me that I was declined, because now I truly can make this the forefront of what I do. And the same standard that I have held the UCP to about this curriculum in education and mental health, damn rights I hold the NDP to, I will hold the Alberta Party to, I will hold any party to. And perhaps my party is not a party. Perhaps my party is Albertans and their children for the next several generations, and being a logical person who can hold our government to accountability. I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know where it's going to come from, all this.
I
just know, door closed, being an MLA. Phew, dodged a bullet. All right. Especially now with all the violence towards women, the politicians, like the slamming back and forth. I don't want to play in that sandbox.
I got a couple points I got to make there right out of the gates. First of all, in regard, I'm glad you brought up it's not NDP bashing, because even on our end where we do the jokes and everything, it's not NDP bashing. It's more of if you see somebody trying to pedal a bike up a hill and you notice that they've got a flat tire, it's going to be a whole lot harder to pedal that bike up the hill with a flat tire. So any reasonable person is going to go, oh, I don't know if you know this, but you got a flat tire there. It's not anything more than you're hindering your own work here.
Well, and I also want to point out that none of this was about me. They don't know me. They saw pictures and they read what I wrote. Like that's it. And I'm completely honest. I have nothing to hide. I do have to admit though, it was really triggering for me as a childhood sexual assault survivor to be asked, have you ever sexually assaulted anybody? That was a really hard question in my vetting, that I'm like, did that need to be asked? Like, it took me a while to get over that one. But so again, this was not about me. It's about it's the fact that they said in their decline email to me, the UCP will target this and derail the NDP campaign. So to me, it was not about the actual things. It was about, we're just going to eliminate you because the UCP are going to target you. Well, kind of guess what? I've been in the public light since April last year about the curriculum, and the UCP have done nothing. Like they haven't said anything against me because, I can combat it anyway. But like, it was baffling to me. So that's the point I want to drive home is, and it's not just the NDP, it's how are political parties choosing and declining based on fear of what the other party will think. And are we really down to winning at all costs? Like, is that what it's down to? Is winning at all costs? That's not the Alberta. That's not democracy.
Well, and I think there's if the NDP are looking for candidates that the UCP won't disagree with, I feel like we've got a bigger problem at play right out of the gates there anyways.
But I also wanted to touch on,
because the UCP would criticize their own members if they crossed the floor. So we're screwed. We're so screwed.
But I also think it's important to highlight particularly what we've seen in the last week. And again, I want to be real clear. It is not a new thing that women who dare to have opinions on things get harassed or threatened or sent appalling, pick the whole thing. It's been happening for a really long time. It has been stunning for me to watch the female contributors to the show. And the women who appear on the show, the vitriol and the comments that get handed their way,
Mm-hmm.
I don't get those. And it would be naive and stupid to think that it's by nature of, it's because I cut such an intimidating presence. That's not what it is. I don't get those threats because I'm a guy. And that's all that it is.
That's all that it is. You don't get those threats because you're a guy.
the fact
you don't have to worry about walking down the street and being yelled at.
Yeah.
You don't have to worry about it.
The fact that you just said a couple minutes ago, it's almost a relief because this way I don't have to deal with this stuff. That's really striking to me because for the NDP is a party that says they want to lift up women. They say they want to elevate women. The fact that there's a woman who went into this process, which again, there's no constitutional pathway for, who is walking out of it going, well, thank goodness. I mean, that's heartbreaking.
Yeah. Well, and I have had some pretty nasty DMs. I've had a couple, and it's men who have gone to it's easy to find my email, but instead of staying on Twitter, they've gone to my personal email and emailed me nasty things. And I just ignore. One I had to report because I've learned as a woman, you have to declare stop contacting me because after that it's harassment. But yet the woman still has to make that statement. So I had to say, your email is inappropriate. Do not ever contact me again. And then he contacted me again with more, derogatory statements. And so, yeah, he's got a police report against him now because I won't tolerate that. And I won't tolerate for other women either. But it really has ramped up and people need to step back. People need to step back. Just because you have a thought doesn't mean you need to say it. Just because you're angry at someone doesn't mean you need to yell profanities at them in public. Like there are politically correct ways of doing it. Now, that being said, I understand people ramping things up. I ramped things up as well because I wasn't being heard. But people are automatically jumping into this extremism because they feel like they're not being heard instead of going through proper channels. But it's also super hard because Jason Kenney made it really impossible to go through proper channels because he started the legislature with earplugs in and made it very clear that he was not listening. He was ramming things through. So honestly, between Donald Trump in the States and Jason Kenney in the last few years, things have ramped up to this point where good, solid, logical people can't seem to make a difference. And the people that are being listened to are the wingnuts. And I'm really nervous for what's going to happen with this leadership race and what's to come. And then no matter what party's in power, the cleanup that needs to happen to look after Albertans and our future. We're at a pivotal point. And, as much as I'll keep advocating and doing everything that I can, we need to stand together and say enough of this, just enough. We're not doing this.
I think that, I'm going to cautiously challenge you a little bit.
Sure.
In that heavy emphasis on the cautiously, in that I would comfortably argue that that people like you absolutely have made significant differences, not only in regards to people are engaged in the process that would not otherwise be engaged. People are more aware. And the other thing that I would say is that it seems like one of the reasons that these political parties do these things is because they feel like they can get away with them. And the only thing that is going to stop that is the right amount of people, and I don't know what that number is, saying, you know what, I'm not cool with this. And the fact that you're stepping up, and again, it isn't NDP bashing, want to be very clear about that, but the fact that you're stepping up and you're saying there is a legitimate process problem here. And there is a very real disconnect between the ideals that I'll be super generous here, the ideals that your party is striving to represent, and what you're actually doing. And you maybe need to square that circle a little bit, because if you don't, people are going to check out. And that's the last thing that we need right now.
Oh, people are so checked out right now. And that's just it. I was talking with a friend and they said, they always considered the NDP to be the place for the misfits, the people who were not, staunch religious conservatives, and, not all UCP are religious conservatives, but you know what I mean. It's the place for the people who don't fit there, and welcoming, accepting, compassionate. No, come over here. We'll look after you. Well, I am on that side of welcoming, open, compassionate, open-minded. Let's talk about the difficult things. And I'm not a fit there. And so if I'm not a fit there, how many other people are going to feel they're not a fit there anymore? And where do they go? They go nowhere and check out. And then this side rises up. And it's just really sad that we've become like these two factions, instead of saying, okay, everybody just shut the fuck up and let's do what's right for Albertans. Let's fix this curriculum. Let's work with educators and figure out smaller class sizes. Let's work with our healthcare professionals and say, what do you need? How can we repair the issues with ambulance? How can we repair the issues with our emergency rooms? How can we repair things with doctors? How can we look after rural Alberta? Oh, Albertans don't want a provincial police force. Fuck it. Let's chuck it and let's just work federally the best we can. Let's stop planting the seeds that everything's being destroyed and focus only on Trudeau. No, we've got a dumpster fire here that we need our people to look after. And it's not going to happen with sovereignty and separation.
Yeah.
That's so arrogant. It's going to happen by the right people helping.
The misfit piece is particularly interesting because it brings to mind I get way too many emails. My inbox is out of control. I mean I think I'm over 10,000 right now that I'm supposed to read that I haven't. Most of them are advertisements and spam, as is everybody's, I'm sure. But I got an email earlier in the week from a magazine that I used to love called Adbusters, and the email was announcing their new product line. And it just really sort of underscored to me that if you're, and it wasn't satirical, they were like, no, seriously, this is the stuff we've got for sale now. It really underscored for me that if you're not incredibly mindful and deliberate, that which you fear and oppose is what you'll become. And hopefully, for those NDP supporters out there, they're able to bring a little bit more deliberation and mindfulness to the table, because from what you're describing, and you're not the only one. This is like the 4th interview that we've done on this. It seems like that shift is starting to happen.
Well, I think people need to become, this is not our grandparents' PC Alberta anymore. This is not what we grew up with. This is, we now seriously need to look at, are our representatives going to be listening regardless, listening to us and bringing that forward, or are they towing a party line? And, you know, like we've got the Alberta Party. I'm looking at everybody's policies, and I'm looking at the people running in my area. And man, the Alberta parties, they've been really quiet before, and they're still really quiet, but there are some good things there. And I think we need to seriously step back, shut up, quit beaking off at the mouth, and say, what do we really want our province to look like? And that's what I'm going to be looking at going forward. Like, I'll be honest, right after this, I'm going to meet Rebecca Schultz. And I'm going to see, is she a person who is going to listen and potentially be collaborative? Or is there a brick wall, like we've seen with Jason Kenney, Danielle Smith, Brian Jean, you know, and some of the others that are beaking off right now with no substance behind them.
Yeah.
I've had discussions with Leela here and Rajan Sani, and I'm like, these women know. And they have been silenced in their party. Like, that's part of the political machine, is you have to have this party united front. But it's not, like, as we've seen now, it's just so fractured. You know, someone said to me, well, why don't you run as an independent? Well, I could, but I'm really not interested in that. Like, my work is the curriculum. So I've been, you know, put back in my place, which is fine. But this next election really is pivotal, and we need to look at what people are doing. And I will continue to just speak out against the things that are not ethical, that are not going to be helpful practices for people.
I've had you for almost an hour and a half now. Is
there
anything else? I don't want to take too much of your time, especially if you've got a meeting with Rebecca Schultz. She won't meet with us, so I don't want to get in the way of that. But is there anything else that you want people to hear? Is there anything else you want people to know? Floor is yours.
You know, I think the biggest thing is to. So one of the things I learned in a Buddhist reading was, it's not your first thought that's important. It's your second thought and then your action. So, like I said before, we can have this immediate reaction to things, and we need to step back and examine it and say, what is my second thought? And then what are my actions going to be based on this? Because I grew up in rural Alberta, had some racist, homophobic understandings as a child. And it took, so I had my initial thoughts, and then I've learned to challenge myself and say, what's your second thought? What is more humanistic and realistic and helpful and kind? And then what are my actions resulting of that? We're far too reactive right now. And we need to just step back and take a breath and be wise about what we're looking at, what we're reading, what the context is behind things, and just how can we be more open, collaborative, and community oriented rather than just yelling immediately. Yell at the right things. Don't yell at the people trying to make a difference.
That's a perfect note to lead things on. Dr. Grace, I want to thank you so much for taking the time to chat today.
You're so welcome, Nate.
And sharing your story. I'm looking forward already to the next time that we're going to have you on the show, because I always enjoy these conversations so much.
Yeah, me too. It's good. Who knows what's going to come next?
There we go. The only other thing that I'll say is, just be a little careful with the Alberta Party. They some of them have some problems with sketch comedy. I have it on good authority, is all I'm going to say. Thank you so much again, Dr. Grace. As always, if you appreciate the kind of content that we're trying to produce here at The Breakdown, we would love it if you swung by our Patreon page at www.patreon.com/thebreakdownab and signed up for a small monthly sponsorship of the work that we're trying to do here. It is because of the support that we receive from our Patreon sponsors that we're able to continually up our game, and it is tremendously appreciated. So I want to throw a big thank you out to them, and you can go ahead and visit that website and join and support us as well, because we need all the help we can get. Thank you so much for your attention. Thank you so much for listening and being part of these important conversations. And we will see you next time on The Breakdown.